We pray that you'll bless our time together today as we discuss the situation and things that are happening in the world. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I have struggled for a title sometimes, and I don't try to make it like breaking news or anything like that. You know, there's somebody that I know, they put up a YouTube channel, and everything is breaking, exclusive, and that type of thing. And I try not to do clickbait. So let me be clear. And I thought of that earlier this week, and now I have no idea why I thought that would be a good title, but it was the only one I could think of when I was putting my slide together a few moments ago. But things are very, I think, a little bit confusing in the world. I don't think we have a lot of clarity on some things, and sometimes people just don't come out. They just don't come out and say what they really mean to say. Everybody's a little bit too much of a politician. I fall into that sometime too. So this is my wheel of prophecy that I've developed up, and I'm pretty confident some Sunday I'm just going to come up here and take a spin and then start talking about whatever pops up. So we live at this interesting time, and it's how these things unfold and whether somebody can say this is a fulfillment of Bible prophecy is very difficult. There's a channel right now, I don't know if I should recommend them, because every time I recommend somebody, then everybody will find something wrong with them and say, oh, well, you must believe everything that they say. But a friend of mine, a guy that I know, is doing a series on fulfilled prophecy. It's a very interesting study because in prophecy, we have a tendency, because we're Western-minded, that, okay, this was fulfilled and it'll never be fulfilled again. You never have to worry about it. But Jewish prophecy is a pattern in many respects. So that there will be, well, for example, you have the different stories, narratives in Daniel. You have Daniel chapter 7 that talks about all these empires. Daniel 8 talks about these empires. Daniel 11. And in these, Revelation 12 will also talk about it. And you will see the concept of the little horn in Bible prophecy. And so you'll see, and I don't know now that I'm thinking about it off the top of my head, but let's just say there's a little horn in Daniel 7, there's a little horn in Daniel 8, there's a little horn in Revelation. Some people say, well, this little horn is this empire, this little horn in Daniel 8 is a different one, and the one in Revelation is a different one. But the answer to it in Jewish prophecy could be that, is it this empire at this historical time? Yes. But that doesn't exclude the fact that it's a pattern for a future fulfillment. So it can be both in Jewish prophecy. And we in the West, we have a little bit of trouble conceptualizing that it can be both. And so we want to say, well, this is fulfilled. Another one would be example in John. It says, another shall come in his name, and him you will receive. Now, clearly that's a reference to someone who comes in the place of Christ. And so it's clear that prophecy had a fulfillment during the Bar Kokhba rebellion around 132 AD. He claimed to be the Messiah. And so then the question becomes, is that the only time you need to pay attention to that prophecy? Okay, somebody came and fulfilled it, but is that a pattern for the future? And so sometimes it's a little bit tricky, and I think there's a tendency for people to want to say, this is that which was prophesied. And it may be this is that which was prophesied, but it doesn't mean it's the end of it. Eventually there will be this final fulfillment. I think I indicated last year, we get into the millennium, largely we will all be preterists, which means fulfilled eschatology. The prophecies have been fulfilled. But we're not there yet. And so when we look at these different prophecies, believe me, I read things that friends of mine put up and I watch videos that they put up in the four horsemen of Revelation. Some people say they started opening right after Jesus went back, ascended to heaven. Others say, no, that can only happen in the 70th week. Others say, well, no, it's going to start before. And my answer is, maybe they're all right. But, and it's not because I don't want to offend anybody, it's just that it's a little bit tricky. And sometimes we're not going to be able to see or be able to say that this was a fulfillment of prophecy until we look backwards at what's happened. So I saw a Jewish rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, young guy, meaning he's younger than me, which sort of includes a lot of humanity now these days. But he was saying this, look, so there's going to be, let's say he called it Gog and Magog. And there's going to be a fulfillment of that. But is it going to be like we're in the middle of it and we can say this is Gog and Magog, or is it going to be it happens and then we look back and say, that was Gog and Magog? I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, and I'm going to tell you something. This one I am certain about. Let me be clear. No one knows for sure. That one I'm confident about. Now, I'm going to... So it's interesting. I have spent a lot of time talking about Machpelah and Hebron, and there's some aerial shots that were in a video that a friend of mine, Yishai Fleischer, put up on his YouTube channel not many years ago. And this is the Tomb of the Patriarchs in Hebron. This is an aerial shot on what would be the dome part is a mosque, and the other part's a synagogue. It's one of the oldest buildings of antiquity that we have standing completely. They built the things on the top. Before that, it was this commemorative building, memorial building that Herod had built 2,000 years ago. And it sits there in the city of Hebron. And I've been there a number of times. It's always a very moving experience. It's the second holiest site in Judaism today. And it's really the one where what was there at the time of Jesus is there today. Now, as I said, with some additions to it. But when you think about the earthquakes and things that they've had in that area, it's amazing that this building's still standing. And it's still standing largely as it was when Herod constructed it 2,000 years ago. The guy really knew what he was doing. And he obviously had a lot of help. So it was interesting as I was sort of looking through, and I think I would recommend that you do this. There's a number of sites that track the various, each week, they're given a Torah portion. A Torah portion, and then a portion of the Psalms, Prophets, Psalms, Proverbs, and then of the prophets that they read. And that's on a cycle. So every year they go completely through the Torah. And it's always interesting to look at what's going on in the world in light of what the Torah portion is for that week. So this week, the Torah portion is Genesis 23 through 25, which is the story of the death of Sarah. When Sarah died, her husband, Abraham, went to a local guy and bought his cave. He wanted to bury Sarah in the cave. And it's interesting that he insisted on buying it. The guy wanted to give it to him, wanted to give him for a really good price. He says, no, I want to pay what it's worth to buy. Now, some tradition in Judaism teaches that Abraham wanted that cave because that's the cave where Adam and Eve had been buried. Now, I don't know if that's true. I do know there are people who went down in that cave 40, 50 years ago, and they found bones down there. So, and by the way, there's like a big, I would call it, it's called a cenotaph, a tombstone type structure for each of the three patriarchs and the three matriarchs of Israel: Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah. It's not where their body is, though, in that cenotaph. There's a cave where they put the bones down below. And to this day, the bones of Abraham might be down there, Sarah and all these others. But it was important, and so I was thinking a little bit about this, about pattern and fulfillment, and how these patterns instruct Jewish people and how they should conduct themselves. So, for example, now I don't know if this is true. This is just something that occurred to me, and I'm probably right, but no, he said humbly. But it's interesting, when they were brought back into the land, starting with the Zionist movement about 130 years, 40 years ago, one of the things that they did was they purchased land. They purchased large tracts of land. And that has continued to this day. Now, the people who now identify themselves as Palestinians, that really never came up until the 60s, the Soviets pushed that narrative on everybody to kind of cause problems. And by the way, they were pretty successful, weren't they, at doing that? They have bought land. And I think part of that is because they had the pattern that Abraham had started. And if you go up to Shem, we sometimes call it Shechem, you'll see Jacob's well. And I believe Jacob had purchased that well. And so they purchased the land, that way they would have title to the land. When David wanted to obtain a place to build the temple, he wasn't going to build the temple, but he was going to make all the provisions for it and gather things, including the place where it was going to be built. He went and purchased the threshing floor of Araunah that happened to be on the top of Mount Moriah. Not, by the way, in the city of David, but on the top of Mount Moriah. And so if you want to read an interesting story, read about Hebron in the Bible, and Machpelah. Abraham bought the land. He buried Sarah there. He was buried there. Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah were all buried there. And that also gives some patterns. I've mentioned this many times before, that at the burial of Isaac, Jacob and Esau came together. So Orthodox rabbis, some will teach today, that this is a picture, a pattern for a future reconciliation of Jew and Arab. The sons of Jacob, the sons of Esau are going to reconcile, much like Jacob and Esau did at the burial of Isaac in Hebron. And it will take place right here. I happen to think that that's true. So go read Genesis chapter 23 through 25 and look at what Abraham did to purchase this cave. And so this weekend, yesterday on Shabbat, this was the Torah portion that was read in the synagogues all over the world, talking about this story. And the Jewish families, when they get together for Shabbat, they will sit down and they will discuss that Torah portion. Let me give you another thought I had about pattern in Scripture. Jesus gave instruction in Matthew chapter 24, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. So then you go back to Daniel and read about the abomination of desolation. You find that it's kind of split up in different passages and verses, some of which had a partial fulfillment, but that doesn't mean that that's the final fulfillment. And Paul picks up on this language, John picks up on this language. But one of the things Jesus says, when you see that, what are you supposed to do? If you're in the area of Jerusalem, flee, get out of town, flee to the wilderness. And so what is going to happen is because of what's going on there in Jerusalem, and you do a whole series about what's going to be going on in Jerusalem at that time. The admonition is for those people who are there to flee. So the early Christians were aware of this teaching of Jesus. So when the Roman armies came against Jerusalem in 66 AD to 70 AD, and they saw that, they left. They got out of town. And I think it's pretty clear that no Christians were really killed in the Roman occupation and subsequent destruction of Jerusalem back in 70 AD, because the Christians had all left. They took the words of Jesus seriously. And I thought about this a number of times, is if that scripture gives us sort of a final instruction as to what's to do, I believe that God in his mercy will prepare people for that moment throughout history. And I think since October 7th, I see a lot of preparation for fleeing going on. I mean, if you go into homes in Jerusalem, they'll have a safe room. When you hear the warnings, you flee to the safe room. And people are leaving areas. And so it's almost like, I hate to say that it's practice for what's coming up, but it's preparation for what's coming up in the future. At least that's my thinking of it. So again, we're at this time where we're going to be these things are going to happen, and as I've mentioned before, they're going to happen at the appointed time. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on. And by the way, there's a lot of things that I didn't even have time to put into my slide deck. I have enough to do this for a good while today. But this is an interesting article in the current Financial Times magazine about time. Science is struggling with time. They have all these atomic clocks and that type of thing. Now, this is not an excuse for you to be late when you're going someplace, because if the scientists can't even get the atomic clock right, but they're off by sub-milliseconds, so if they're off just a little bit, but they have all these different atomic clocks, and they, for lack of a better term, they have to reset them a little bit every so often to make sure they're all together. Earth is a very complicated place. Time is very complicated. What was it? I think it's what Chuck Missler used to quote it. He said that, quantum physics, where they have these concepts where particles can be two different characters, all of this, they can exist separately but be connected, and all this. And he says it's impossible for anybody to understand that except PhD physicists and 3-year-olds who can sort of grasp those concepts. So speaking of 3-year-olds, this is an interesting cover from the Financial Times. So Department of Government Efficiency, headed up by Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk. And you see this, it's Elon playing with his toys. Like everything is a toy for him to play with in the world. And he's done some amazing things. One of the things he may be best at is getting the government to sort of fund his businesses, like space, like Tesla, like subsidies for electric cars and that type of thing. So they're coming in and they're going to try to take an axe to the federal bureaucracy. And people are not liking it. There's a lot of things going on in Washington, D.C. right now with the change in administration coming up. I don't know what the Biden administration has planned. I'm sure they're going to be putting up roadblocks like they did back in 2016 and early 2017 to block Trump. I'm sure there are going to be a bunch of executive orders coming, and I'm sure that the first day after he's sworn in, Trump is going to be down there unwinding all the stuff that they've done over the last couple of months. Now, this is an interesting picture. This is a picture that was taken this week at the Department of Justice. Now, I know a little bit about the legalities of this, but so this is from the Gateway Pundit. What's going on here? Paper shredding truck spotted outside the Department of Justice building days after Trump announces Matt Gaetz' Attorney General nomination. Now, maybe that's just a regular visit by the the shredding company to the Department of Justice. But in litigation, we have things that we call litigation hold letters. So when you get involved in litigation with a company and you know they're going to be electronic or other records, you will send or you think there's going to be litigation, you will send a litigation hold record to the company that you're thinking about suing saying, preserve your documents. Don't throw anything away. And I know that message has been sent all over DC. Don't get rid of anything. It appears that somebody's not paying attention to that. And see, it's document and product destruction is what that company does. If you do that, by the way, if you get a notice to preserve your documents and you don't, that then creates a rebuttable presumption in litigation that comes about. So if you had emails, and believe me, I've had to produce emails in cases, and just in a short period of time, we have like 5,000 emails and communications back and forth in just a couple of months with a client on one case. So if you're told preserve your documents and then you destroy them, like Hillary Clinton did, then the rebuttable presumption is you did that because there's something in there that's any presumption or any inference that can be drawn in the case has to be drawn against you because of your destruction of the documents. Now, you can refute that, but it's pretty hard when you've destroyed the documents. And I think that this is probably something that's going on all over DC right now. And I see a lot of people everybody's lawyering up in DC. It's a great season to be a lawyer in DC, unless you're on the wrong side of these things, which some people are. And I'm all for people hiring lawyers. That's a good thing. And by the way, just because you hire a lawyer does not mean you think you're guilty or anything like that. Trust me, the system is very complex. And if you're getting caught up in the system, you need to have a lawyer. Because if you're trying to navigate that on your own because you're convinced of your innocence, it's not going to work. You're setting yourself up for problems. Now, so this is, we had COP29, and all these lunatics went to Azerbaijan, which is an oil-producing country, by the way. That's their main export. And everybody's upset, well, why do we have the climate thing in Azerbaijan? Why would we do that? Well, because, without oil and gas, your life is going to be very, very different. And the lunatics at COP29 who flew in on their gas-powered jets and that type of thing, they don't understand. Well, maybe they do understand. But this is an interesting chart. This was in the Washington Post, about a month ago. And it says, science can't keep up with this was an article this week. Science can't keep up with the warming planet. It's just terrible. We have this warming planet, and we're gonna burn. It's everything's gonna burn down. But a month ago in the Washington Post, they had a big chart, and the chart was, now they accept that it's an old Earth and everything, and I would disagree with that. But the chart was 485 million years. And it said this is where the average temperature was. So if you go back 485 million years ago, okay, then first vertebrates and that type of thing, and this is the global mean surface temperature of the Earth. What do you find on this chart? Well, what you find on this chart is that over here in the far right, that's the last short period of human history, the last few hundred years. And what do you find? The global mean surface temperature of the Earth has always been warmer than even it is today. Before, and 480 million years ago, they didn't have coal-burning power plants, but the Earth was warmer. And what happened? And again, I'll grant them their assumptions on time and that life survived. And they would say life even evolved over this time when it was warmer. So then there was, you can see over the last however many years on this chart, see all the way here on the right, and that's what this looks like. So, do you see that in the recent history of the Earth, the temperature, global mean surface temperature, went way down? By the way, I don't think Al Gore put any of this in his slides. And so what's happened is you see this little spike all the way at the end. That's what all the big calamity is about with COP28, COP29, climate change, global. By the way, this is the Washington Post that put this chart out. And I think it shows that there's this collective insanity in the world, a Romans 1 world, where people have lost the ability to reason for any number of reasons. Because the evidence is staring you right in the face that this is not that bad. Okay, when I see the temperature going up like that, I think, January tea times. I'm all for fighting for tea times in January. That would be a good thing. So AI, of course, is, I don't think, going to correct this. This is from, I think I used this last week, that there's a lot of things coming out of AI. And there's a big article, don't have time to get into it today, the New York Times this morning or yesterday about AI, generative AI doesn't really work that well. So what they do, and I'll try to talk more about it, was how many of you have seen AI generated pictures? And by the way, how do you know anymore whether it's AI generated or not? You have to really look for clues. But what they did was they took like a picture of like 200 faces, and then they ran it through AI, having AI learn on those pictures. And then they took it through 20 generations of AI learning from each generation of those 200 faces. And what did they find at the end? They all looked alike, pretty much. They might have long hair, but all their facial features were pretty much identical. They're also finding, like with handwritten numbers, when they go through to the next generation, the numbers get fuzzier and fuzzier till they get out to about 8 generations of learning through AI. You can hardly read the numbers. In other words, in the New York Times article concluded, if AI is learning on its own, it's making itself stupid, more stupid each time. And so, but the problem is that they're using this for a lot of systems, and they're firing all their safety directors, which seems to be, well, it sounds like something AI would do if it was thinking through the problem. Well, we got everything under control, we'll just get rid of the safety guys. And I don't think that that's a good thing. AI is guzzling up electricity and threatening U.S. climate goals. And here's NVIDIA, they're going through a thing. Now, the climate people are also against farmers. So this is going on in the UK right now. They're trying to put a heavy tax on people that want to leave the family farm to the next generation. And so one of the guys was complaining to a member of parliament about that. He goes, well, I don't think you're losing as much money farming as you are. Oh, well, prove it. Well, I don't have to prove it because I'm in the government and I have superior knowledge over you. So a big protest. This is Whitehall in London, and they're calling it Farmageddon. And the farmers just can't keep up. I thought sometimes editorial cartoons do a really great job of capturing the concept. So this is Starmer and his finance person in the new British government, and this is what they're doing. You see what they're doing? They're sort of harvesting all the money from the farmers and putting into a government coffer. That is a brilliant editorial cartoon. So let's talk a little bit about the U.S. and elections. One, I have to say, I'm sort of happy about Trump, but I have concerns. Some of his hires, appointments, I'm sort of like, what are you thinking, or who's advising you? But then again, I have to always remember, I'm not in charge there or anywhere else very much. But so here's Trump. They had a big hush money case, 34 felony convictions. Remember, this was a big deal in the election. And so what happened? He hasn't been sentenced. And Alvin Bragg came in and said, well, we need to just put this off and maybe delay it 4 years. But this has nothing to do with the election results, he said. Okay. I didn't believe him when he brought the case. I don't believe him now. And by the way, even the New York Times has a big editorial, either yesterday or today, saying, you know, maybe this lawfare thing that they did against Republicans and Trump, maybe that wasn't the best method. Well, now, why are they saying that? Because they're not in charge. They're not going to be in charge in another 2 months, less than 2 months, and they're worried about what's going to happen. And I think that that's happening. So this business are upset about Trump deportation plan. How's it going to impact different businesses in the United States? This is the new Newsweek. Trump's got the world in a spin. I think that that's probably accurate. And in the Financial Times, the guy comes out, he doesn't like Trump, by the way. You might gather that from his editorial. Trump's demolition of the U.S. state. He's just tearing everything down. He's changing it. I think that that's pretty clear. So Gates was his appointment for Attorney General, and that's really where a lot of this revolves around. They're like, wait a minute, we've had the Department of Justice. We really had control of the Department of Justice in the first Trump administration, but now it looks like we might lose control of the Department of Justice. And how dare they weaponize the Department of Justice? Really? Now you're concerned about it. My general reaction is, if you can prosecute them, prosecute them. Don't stretch it. Don't be ridiculous. But certainly there were crimes committed. And guys like Jack Smith, who brought this documents case, they did the documents case against Trump, but not against Biden for the same thing, because, well, Biden's too senile or too mentally incompetent to really go through a trial. But he can run the country and he can have his finger on the nuclear button. That's okay. So they're concerned about this. You've got Hegseth coming in at the Department of Defense. Gates withdrew. Hegseth looks like he might make it. Trump replaced Matt Gaetz, with Pam Bondi from Florida, who served 8 years as the Attorney General down there. And let me tell you, I question the Gaetz appointment. That was just my opinion. But Pam Bondi is a force. She knows what she's doing, and I think they're more upset now. So it's sort of like, when you squeal. What was that the movie Out of Africa with Meryl Streep and Robert Redford? There was a quote in there that says, when the gods want to punish you, they give you your dreams. So your dream was to get rid of Matt Gaetz, and what did you get? You got Pam Bondi instead. And of course, the anti-Israel people, she said she's a big supporter of Israel. And the anti-Semitism thing is just completely out of control. So Gaetz withdrew. Down in Brazil, they've indicted Bolsonaro, the former president, over the election from a couple of years ago because he was questioning the results of the election. So now he's been indicted, but he's a very conservative, Christian, pro-Israel guy, and they're going after him, and they're going after him for a reason. But some people, this is Wall Street Journal yesterday, Trump's sway over the GOP shows limits. And it's interesting. One person said, well, that Trump, he's a fascist. And so some people went to him and said, well, maybe you shouldn't have Gaetz. Okay, well, I'll get somebody else. And it's sort of like, oh, I didn't think you would be reasonable. I didn't think we could talk to you. And they're like, well, what? Oh, then you must really be doing something evil because you're head faking us and all this other stuff. So right now there's a big controversy in Washington. On the left is Nancy Mace. She's a Republican congresswoman from South Carolina, and at the risk of being accused of misgendering the person on the right is a Delaware congressman from Delaware, the first open transgender elected to Congress. And so Nancy Mace is like, I don't want him in my bathroom. And then they're going, oh, look at her misgendering him. And it's just she's so mean. And she goes, I'll show you a video of this in just a moment. And so the Washington Post had this article, does Nancy Mace know how women's bathrooms work? Are they different? You go in, shut the door, right? I've accidentally walked into the wrong one. I'm sure we all have. And you pretty much get a feel right away like, I don't belong here. For some reason, it just doesn't feel right. So Nancy Mace, she's been tweeting. And so here's,
no matter how you
this is AOC. We're getting near the end of the Biden administration, so I've got to get these people in while they still have some relevance. So she was complaining. So what Nancy Mace did was she put in place she's introduced legislation into the House of Representatives to say, you go to the bathroom related to your biological sex. And this is causing a meltdown. Here is AOC melting down.
And everybody, no matter how you feel on this issue, should reject it completely. What are they doing? They're doing this so that Nancy Mace can make a buck and send a text and fundraise off an email. They're not doing this to protect people. They're endangering women. They're endangering girls of all kinds. And everybody should reject it. It's gross. Thank you.
Thank you.
And wait. But this person's, and by the way, when you look at the picture that they put up, this is from the same article in the Washington Post. Look at the picture of Nancy Mace. This is how they editorialize on everything. What's the picture? It's dark. It's foreboding. You see that? But the picture of this guy, it's bright, it's cheerful, all the colors in balance and all this other stuff. I don't think that's an accident. I think that's done to mentally arrange things in your mind about how this happens. So Nancy Mace went after she introduces the legislation, she goes to a Project Liberty Summit, and it's about the future of the internet. She's there with herself and a very democratic left-wing congressman from California. And they're talking about the future of the internet and safety and privacy and everything, but this subject comes up. So here's a little bit of that exchange.
And I think the question today is the internet is not civil.
Nope.
Right? And I'm living with that right now in real time. And but we have a lot of responsibilities too. Ro and I.
I'm sorry. We're living with that in real time right now. This is ridiculous. It is the day after Trans Day of Visibility. We have had dozens of trans people die this year because of the hate and lies that you are spreading. And if we want an internet, are we building an internet with free speech for everyone or just the privileged few? Are you going to stand up for the lives of trans people, black and brown people? Are we fighting for justice or are we fighting for big tech? I hope you're fighting.
We respect freedom of speech.
God loves him. I love him,
right.
but his isn't going to be in my bathroom. So, at any rate, but we have a responsibility. If you're pro-man watching me undress in a dressing room, you're part of the problem. But we're here to talk about the internet, and Ro, being a progressive Democrat, me being a conservative Republican, have found ways to work together on tech issues, freedom of speech issues, and do it in a way that's very successful. Right, Ro?
And look, I'll say this about Representative Mace. I mean, we've worked together on a number of issues, but Representative Mace, I have to say, on the issue of transgender rights, we just have a profound disagreement.
Women have rights, and I'm going to fight for those rights.
I could finish.
Women have a right to privacy, and women have rights to go
I didn't interrupt you,
without a man's penis
Nancy.
being in the room.
I think that the Representative McBride deserves dignity and fairness.
Women deserve dignity
Speaker
and
Johnson
respect.
said in terms of the scripture and faith and treating people with dignity.
I'm not going to allow you or any other man to erase women, period. You're not going to erase me or my rights at all.
We just have a profound disagreement on that issue. I mean, we have worked together, as you know, on a lot of legislation together,
And
but
you're
on
wrong.
that, we have
You're on the wrong side of history on
very
this.
profound
I was the
disagreement.
first woman to graduate from the Citadel, the military college of South Carolina, and I'm not going to allow a man to tell me that I don't have rights. And if you think you're okay with a man being in my dressing room watching me undress or watching me in the bathroom, that's not okay. It's a mental illness. It's not okay. Women deserve to be protected. And in fact, there are underage girls in California right now, your home state, who were kicked out of school for wearing a simple shirt, and you're pro-First Amendment, that said Save Girls Sports. And they were called Nazis for doing it. This is what little girls and women are fighting for all across the country.
Well, hey, we came here to talk about tech.
I am for free speech. I went on Megyn Kelly's show to talk about the issue of transgender rights. We had a civil conversation.
You're not pro-woman. You're not pro-woman.
But let me just say this.
You're anti-women.
Let me say this. The divisions in this country.
Why do you hate women? Why do you hate your female
Hey,
colleagues?
they're using the mute feature right now. Come on, tech.
But it shows that the divisions of this country aren't just caused by tech. They're caused by a fundamental difference of values. Let's not kid ourselves.
Women have
Let's not
values.
kid
To every
ourselves.
woman in the room today, you have values and you have rights.
I have to say that, but
Okay.
go ahead.
So this is an editorial in the New York Times this morning. Trans rights are reproductive rights. But do you see how they changed language? And I'm sorry, look, the congressman, left-wing congressman from California, I know that's kind of redundant, but he was right. It's a fundamental difference in values about things. And that's a problem. So, and I look at this, I see this, the secret behind America's moral panic. It's like XX and XY. It does not change. Every cell in your body stays the same, even when you have cosmetic surgery to pretend that you're something different. I'm sorry, that's just, this video is probably going to get blocked and everything. By the way, this is, I can't remember where I found this article. It's the woke psychopathology, a taxonomy, and they talk about, how these different things factor in, like race, climate change, trans, and the manifestation that they have. Some people said that activist who spoke at interrupted Nancy Mace, and I'm not always a big fan of her. She's kind of in your face Mace. But the activist that spoke at that conference, some people refer to him as being part of Trantifa, get it? And then some of the people, the medical people, they're transhausen, like Munchausen, where you put somebody in a place to make them sick so you feel better about them getting treatment and that type of thing. And then I have one, the New York Times Hausen, but we don't have time to talk about that. So let's talk. So the world's in a big state of turmoil about a lot of things. The Russian bear seems to be very active right now. The Economist did a seminar this week that I hope to listen to called The World Ahead 2025. All those different magazine covers of The Economist that are sort of predictive. And a lot of people say, well, they're predictive because they know what they're going to try to do. So they have a big conference. They had one this week, and there's a new cover out called The World Ahead 2025. I'll talk more about it in the future. But this showed up as I don't know if this is, somebody made this up, but it does seem to be appropriate. Apocalypse. But the interesting thing is they put Trump and Putin on there. Trump's not the president yet. By the way, a lot of people in the world are treating him like he is. I mean, he's calling and talking to everybody about what he's going to do. So there's a lot of turmoil over Ukraine right now. What's happening there? The Swedish government put out a big brochure this week. Now, they do this fairly regularly, but it just seems a little strange that this week they put out an updated version. It's called In Case of Crisis or War. And it's about a 32-page publication. You can download it. It's to all residents of Sweden. To resist these threats, we build resilience every day. In this brochure, you learn how to prepare for and act in case of crisis or war. You are part of Sweden's overall emergency preparedness. And so there's all these different subjects, total defense, warning systems, home preparedness. And it's a pretty comprehensive guide. Talks about Sweden now being in NATO, and NATO will help us, but we have to work on Swedish defense. We're all part of the defense force in Sweden. We may be at a heightened state of alert. You have a total defense duty. And it's interesting. It says here, during a heightened state of alert, go to work or school unless you are assigned to a specific wartime posting. So in other words, just sort of pretend that everything is normal when it's not. So this Ukraine-Russia war, now getting close to 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. This week, Kyiv took U.S. missiles, were finally given permission by Biden, the lame duck president of the United States. Go ahead and use the missiles that we sent you, and you can use to attack deep into Russia. Now, those missiles only go 190 miles max. And I struggle with this because Putin invaded Ukraine. Listen, if you look at the state of readiness of the US and Europe, nobody's invading Russia. So he had a much bigger agenda that nobody ever seems to want to talk about, particularly all these sycophants that get on and talk about, oh, poor Putin, he's protecting humanity and Christianity, blah, blah, blah. He's destroyed Ukraine. I'm going to guess there's 1 million people between Ukrainians and Russians dead. He's bringing in mercenaries from Yemen. Now I've seen bodies of dead North Korean soldiers in Ukraine. They're moving to the front lines. There's a sort of a little bit back and forth. But Putin is angry. They gave the UK gave permission for their Shadows missile to be launched into Russia, which probably goes a little bit deeper than the missiles from the United States. And so the question is it effective? What are they doing? And it appears that there's a number of people that seem to be baiting Putin. Let's be honest about that. They're trying to bait him into doing something, and he seems to be taking the bait. He seems to relish it. They fired a new missile at Ukraine the other day. Now, it was originally pointed to be a intercontinental ballistic missile that they'd never used before, but it appears it was a hypersonic missile. And some of the videos are pretty chilling about what he does. And Putin came out and said, listen, we did this to Ukraine, we can do that to any one of you. And he might be right about that. So they altered their nuclear doctrine, which said, if we feel threatened, we can start with nuclear weapons in the first instance. That it's been changing more towards that direction over the last number of years. Putin rewrites the rules on conflict, and then there was this article here, what Moscow's new nuclear doctrine means. And here's just a short analysis. Russia's nuclear doctrine is the set of rules that Moscow imposes on itself for the use of nuclear weapons. It now states that the Kremlin can use its vast nuclear arsenal in response to any aggression that poses a critical threat to Russia's sovereignty or territorial integrity. This open-ended criterion signed off by President Putin the other day nuclear retaliation was only allowed if the existence of the Russian state was under threat. So they've modified that, so they have more options. And there's a lot of editorials, Times UK, Washington Post, New York Times. And some people say, look, he's just bluffing. He's not going to do this. I'm just saying, be careful with saying that or adopting that position, because he might. This was an editorial in the Times of London yesterday. What's that to convey? He's putting on a big show, how strong I am, but he's really kind of weak and emaciated behind the big arm. I just think that's a little bit. So Russia released this on state TV. They put out this video. Turn that off. And so that what it did was it says, listen, we can attack anywhere in Europe. We can attack with our nuclear missiles. And they show that, Russia does these graphics, and they show us attacking Russia, attacking Europe. And they said, listen, we can shut down the UK with 3 nuclear missiles. And he's probably right. What would happen if 3 nuclear missiles landed in England and Scotland? That would have a big, whether it damages everything or not, you hit London with one of those things, you've caused major, major damage. And so then there's this question about hypersonic missiles. This is a graphic that you can find on Rumble and on YouTube about the different speeds of these hypersonic missiles that everybody's been developing, and intercontinental ballistic missiles and how fast they go. And so this does a comparison, and some of these go at like Mach 3, some go at Mach 2s. For example, here's a Zircon missile. It goes at Mach 9. It shows how it separates and flies. And the question is, some of that is based on what they're saying about their own missiles. Some question whether that's true or not, but these things can really move. So here's a Kinzhal missile, goes at Mach 10. And it's sort of showing how much territory that thing can cover. Mach 10 is 10 times the speed of sound. That's 7,500 miles per hour. And then some of here's an intercontinental missile that the United States has. It goes to Mach 20. And then they have the Sarmat, the big Russian missile that how fast it goes is classified, but some people say that it actually goes at Mach 27 times the speed of sound. There's nothing that's going to intercept that. I don't think Russia has things to intercept our missiles. We don't have things to intercept their missiles. It puts our surface fleet, aircraft carriers at risk. And then the question is, who has the better technology to track submarines? Russia has pretty good technology in that. So you see some of these are dropped from airplanes. And I don't think that the Russian missile defense stuff is as good as it's touted to be. Israel took out all that stuff. They had S-300s in Iran. Now Russia has developed an S-400 and S-500. And I don't know that anybody really has any experience with trying to overcome that at the present time, at least publicly. So this is interesting too. Pole shift, magnetic north is moving. What's the impact going to be on the world with that? And that might be, remember in the verse in is it Isaiah where it says the earth is wobbling, reeling like a drunken person? That may be coming true in our time. So Europe is trying, well, we're going to do something, but the problem with Europe is, and like in war games, the Royal Navy carriers mostly get sunk. Because they're sitting on the surface and everybody has these fast missiles now. At the same time, maybe this is why UK is putting this in place. Their armed forces don't do that well, so we're going to do assisted dying. And so this is the European version of The Economist this week. It's time. Why Britain should have the right to die. And I just think this is all the stuff that is the outgrowth of abortion and that type of thing is now coming to fruition. So there's a debate in the House of Parliament about what we're going to do. Should we have assisted dying or not? And there's counter arguments. This is the Times of London from today. This editorial is correct. We'll regret this. So back to the Russia pipeline, gas. In this week, there were internet cables in the Baltic Sea that were cut. Apparently, there's some reports that this was a Chinese ship in the area when these cables got cut. It may have been an intentional act. And everything runs on the internet through undersea cables. So now there are bypasses and everything, but the fact is this may have been a test, may have been to send a message. And by the way, the commander of this ship was Russian. Ukraine's starting to build its own missiles. In the Middle East, flying around with all these missiles flying around from everybody is difficult for air travel. That's why it's a lot of flights in and out of Israel are getting canceled. All over the Middle East, flights are getting canceled. And then this comes out, EU central bankers warn of a decline. New York Times this morning or yesterday, Germany's economy, once a leader in Europe, is now in crisis. And what happened, I found a think tank article on this, I think it was at the Baker Institute, and it said years ago, Germany and France, Germany was ahead of France, but France decided to go nuclear. France started building nuclear power plants. They based it on just 5 different designs so they could build them quickly. And eventually France built so many nuclear plants that they had a excess capacity for electricity. Well, Germany's then, remember the Japanese earthquake in 2011, Fukushima, and everybody got upset with that all these plants were going to be melting down. It was going to be like the China syndrome all over the world with these nuclear power plants. So Germany decommissioned all their power plants. Then they said, well, we don't really want coal burning power plants, so we'll go to gas maybe. Well, we're going to do renewable energy. Well, the problem with renewable energy is, solar and wind, is it doesn't work all the time. And you need a continuous base load of power to operate. So now France is fine, Germany's reeling, and my understanding is that the cost of electricity in Germany is 4 to 8 times the cost of what it is here in the United States. Now, what would that do to your budget? I mean, it's high. I think we can all agree it's high enough as it is. And so now 12 countries have stepped up and said, well, we're going to support Ukraine militarily, but I don't know how serious of a threat this is. I think I might have mentioned this last week. Some good articles at Foreign Affairs talking about battles of precise mass. And I think all this stuff when I'm reading it, I'm sort of like, yeah, this sounds like this verse, this sounds like this passage, this sounds like different end time wars and that sort of thing. And how is this all going to play out? Okay, now, I think, okay, this is an interesting thing. So this is the world against Israel. I guess you could put everything under this. The world is coming against Israel. So an Italian court this week ruled that Al-Quds, Jerusalem, cannot be Israel's capital under international law. Yeah, the Italians are going to tell us how to run things, right? I'm sorry, but I mean, have you been to traffic in Rome? I mean, have you seen what it looks like? An Italian court has ruled on the status of the occupied Palestinian city, this is from an Iranian paper, of Al-Quds, underlining that the holy city cannot be acknowledged as the capital of the Israeli regime. The Rome court said its ruling was based on international legal principles and represents worldwide attempts to negotiate the Israeli-Palestinian dispute by taking an impartial position on the controversial matter. But their position's not impartial. What? This lady, by the way, if you want to follow a lunatic, follow her on Twitter. She's the UN Special Rapporteur on the Palestinian issue. She hates Israel. She's anti-Jewish. She hates Jews. She is an absolute raving lunatic. Just read her tweets. So somebody suggested, well, you know, Italian court, you're in Rome. So maybe you just take a little meander on down by the Colosseum and you look at this, this is the Arch of Constantine, and then just down the street a little bit, less than a block away, is the Arch of Titus. Constructed after Titus returned from his victory in Israel in 70 AD, and in the arch is this panel showing the sacking of the temple in Jerusalem. You see the menorah, you see the silver trumpets. Here's somebody, they've done a colorized version of this, which is pretty good. And it's right there that, yeah, that's Jerusalem. That's the capital of Israel that you say doesn't really have any right to exist. So I'm going to skip over this next part. I talked a little bit about this last week, the Arab Summit on the Middle East. There's a good article in Bloomberg about Mohammed bin Salman. You can find that at Bloomberg. Mohammed bin Salman's style shift sets up a new world order strategy. And I'm telling you, I see some things going on that might be prophetically significant. I mean, look, Trump's been talking about peace everywhere. We know that there's a fake peace coming, that it will delude the world. Putin, he's making all these claims about nuclear. I'm going to go nuclear on everybody. And he may very well, but he may also be setting it up so that he comes in and says, I'm going to help make peace. I've given up nuclear for peace. Look, what a great guy I am. And he's a propagandist. He was trained in the KGB, and I could see that happening. And Mohammed bin Salman wants to do this. His good friend Jared Kushner seems to be behind the scenes and pushing the Abraham Accords, a two-state solution, and that type of thing. And so everybody's talking about that. And so this article of Bloomberg says this: MBS has played the role of peacemaker in the Middle East and even forged a closer relationship with Turkey's Erdogan. By the way, Erdogan this week said, I want nothing to do with Israel. I'm done with Israel. And so the Saudis have this big financial investment initiative institute. They just had number 8, FII Institute 8. And by the way, here's a big interview of Elon Musk by Peter, I can't remember his last name. So now everybody's upset because Trump's appointing all these Zionists to positions in his government, like Mike Huckabee, who was a Baptist minister at one point. Well, Southern Baptist, it says right here in the article. He says, well, I don't really believe in the West Bank. I believe in Judea and Samaria. By the way, if you can go back and look at some of the National Geographic maps that might say Palestine or West Bank, if you look below that in lighter letters is Judea and Samaria. Even they recognize that these are what the biblical historical things are. So he says, I just don't believe this. I don't believe the Palestinian people are real. Ahead of the Middle East Institute's program on Palestinian-Israeli affairs said, the appointments are actually worse than I thought they would be. I'm like, okay, but look, this article in the Times, my children fear bombs, but Trump will make us safe. That's kind of interesting. So here's one of the big stories of the week. Hague Court in The Hague, the International Criminal Court, it said we're issuing arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the now former defense minister of Israel. And so this has been all over the press. They accuse Gallant and Netanyahu of war crimes. And their warrants, they said, well, they have to be secret. They haven't released the warrants. But they've said, look, Netanyahu and Gallant, if you go to a country that's part of the International Criminal Court, the Rome Statute, as signed onto that, you can be arrested. And so this is, all these headlines everywhere, It's interesting. Netanyahu wanted by ICC as strikes kill dozens in Gaza. And then it says here, U.S. condemns warrants against Israeli officials with Hamas commander also facing arrest. The guy's dead, the Hamas commander. But they're issuing a warrant against him because we're going to show that we're fair and balanced. So we only arrest you if you're part of Hamas, if you're dead, if you've been killed by this. So here's Netanyahu's response to these.
Court is a modern Dreyfus trial, and it will end the same way. 130 years ago, the French Jewish officer Alfred Dreyfus was falsely accused of treason by a biased French court. In response to these false accusations, the great French writer Émile Zola wrote his monumental essay, J'accuse. He accused the French court of anti-Semitic lies against an innocent officer who was later exonerated of all guilt. Now an international court in The Hague, also headed by a French judge, is repeating this outrageous offense. It is falsely accusing me, the democratically elected Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and Israel's former Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, of deliberately targeting civilians. This when we do everything in our power to avoid civilian casualties. We issue millions of text messages, phone calls, leaflets to the citizens of Gaza to get them out of harm's way, while the Hamas terrorists do everything in their power to keep them in harm's way, including shooting them, using them as human shields. The court in The Hague accuses us of a deliberate policy of starvation. This when we've supplied Gaza with 700,000 tons of food.
In fact, the food that they supply to Gaza puts Gaza in the upper echelon of number of calories available per day. But it's stolen by gangs. And then they ask the people associated with UNRWA and the UN, it's like, well, we don't ask questions as to who's stealing it. It's not our fault, it's Israel's fault. Israel's letting tons and tons and tons of food go in. So they did ask Baby Trudeau his opinion about the ICC arrest warrants. Here's what the Foreign Minister of the European Union said, Joseph Borrell. EU governments cannot pick and choose whether to execute arrest warrants issued by the ICC against Israeli leaders, EU's Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell said on Saturday. We'll arrest them if they come into the European Union. And then here's Trudeau.
That the ICC has issued warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Canadian law enforcement is obligated to arrest them should they come to Canada. Will you allow that to happen, or will you step in to prevent an arrest?
First of all, as Canada has always said, it's really important that everyone abide by international law. This is something we've been calling on from the beginning of the conflict. We are one of the founding members of the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice. We stand up for international law, and we will abide by all the regulations and rulings of the international courts. This is just who we are.
Okay, that's that sort of hit my limit, my Trudeau limit. And so this is the Tehran Times. Various countries have announced they will adhere to ICC arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant, including this is front page of the Telegraph and the Times of London. Israeli leader faces arrest if he flies into Britain. Viktor Orban said, hey, Netanyahu, come to Hungary. We'd love to have you. This is from Al Akbar. You can see some of the images that they use there of Bibi Netanyahu being arrested. Wall Street Journal yesterday had a number of articles and editorials. ICC warrants deepen Israel's isolation. And so this is but the final fulfillment of Zechariah 12:14, all nations coming against Israel, but it's certainly along the way. So I think you could say prophecy's being fulfilled by the things that are happening, that we see happening. Now, here's Sky News. This is a brief interview on the ICC issue with Natasha Hausdorff. I'm going to make a request here. I was texting with Natasha yesterday because I'd like to interview her, but she's extremely busy. And so I just would ask that you pray for her. There are certain people that I think are... I was talking to a friend in Israel, Danny Seaman. And I said, Danny, I watch you, I watch Carolyn Glick, I watch Natasha Hausdorff, and I really think with the convergence of events and what's happening in the world, this is your moment. This is a moment for you that you've been prepared all these years to step up and do this. And I think I would say that about Natasha. So here she is a few hours ago on Sky News in Australia talking about the ICC warrants.
Talking to us as someone who knows the law inside out, particularly international law. Natasha Hausdorff, great to have you back on Outsiders. This is an absolute disgrace what has happened. Tell us the legal ramifications and your thoughts on the fact that they are saying the International Criminal Court have put out an arrest warrant for the Prime Minister of Israel.
But always wonderful to be with you. Just unfortunate that it's in these circumstances. Yes, this is a decision by the pretrial chamber to issue arrest warrants, not just against Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, but also against a dead man, Mohammed Daif. Hamas confirmed his death some 3 weeks ago. So the overriding impression, certainly from that inclusion of a dead Hamas terrorist, is that the court is seeking to approach this matter looking as if it's going after both sides in some even-handed fashion. Of course, that in and of itself is drawing an abhorrent moral equivalence between the only democracy in the Middle East and an internationally prescribed terrorist organization. But quite apart from those optics, the lack of jurisdiction that the court has to issue this arrest warrant, the flagrant violation of its own rules in not allowing Israel the opportunity to investigate and prosecute any credible allegations, and proceeding in these circumstances in a plainly political fashion, throws an awful lot of the law out of the window. And it's a further step, unfortunately, in the weaponization of international legal institutions against Israel. It's interesting that you remark on the personnel at the court. Anecdotally, I can say it seems that the vast majority of the work of the International Criminal Court appears to be done by unpaid interns. Nonetheless, this is at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars. That is funded by member states of the ICC, including Australia. And it is incumbent, I would suggest, on every single state that actually upholds the rule of law, that prizes international law, to hold the court to account on this victimization of the Jewish state, because, and it's the last important aspect that I'll highlight here, these arrest warrant applications were predicated on entirely false information. The prosecutor of the ICC put out a public summary of his application, which he made on the 20th of May, and every phrase of every sentence of that public summary was false. It's been shown to be false by the organization I'm very, very proud to be involved with, UK Lawyers for Israel, that went through those allegations chapter and verse, including the suggestion that Israel closed crossings into Gaza, prevented aid from going in. Nothing of that sort, in fact, happened. On the contrary, the facilitation of aid into the Gaza Strip by Israel, by COGAT in particular, which is the unit of the IDF that's responsible for this, has far exceeded the requirements of the population of the Gaza Strip. Whether that's got to the people that need it inside the Strip, unfortunately, that has been hampered by Hamas. But in terms of facilitating aid into the Strip, Israel has gone above and beyond to ensure that that has occurred. And all the international aid, bar 1%, which was kept back for security reasons, has in fact been provided into Gaza.
So you can go get that. She's done a number of other interviews this week. Just look her up on YouTube, Natasha Hausdorff, and then go up and click on, there's like a filter, and then click on upload date, and it'll give you all the most recent things that she's done. She does excellent work. So these are like, this is the Tehran Times. You've got the poster now on the building in Palestinian Square of Netanyahu and Gallant behind bars. The beginnings of the isolation of Israel wanted criminals. This is Interpol, demand for ICC to involve Interpol to arrest Netanyahu and Gallant. The editorial cartoon from an Arab paper this week, kind of interesting, sort of showing the IDF trying to juggle all these things. Tom Cotton, so I've got just a couple more things and then I'll finish up. I certainly won't get done with things, and I know it's a holiday week, so I'll try to do something midweek. I'm not sure. But anyway, Tom Cotton tweeted this. This is kind of an interesting thing, and at Be Alert, Bible Prophecy in the News Facebook page, the person who maintains and posted that page sent me this, and I thought, yeah, this is good. So I looked into it a little bit more in depth. So Tom Cotton said this: the ICC is a kangaroo court, and Karim Khan is a deranged fanatic. By the way, he's under investigation for sexual abuse. When he was approached and said, you're being investigated for sexual abuse, Mr. Lawyer, Mr. Muslim lawyer, whose brother's in prison for sexually abusing an underage person. He was a member of parliament in the UK. He's Muslim. And by the way, he believes, his strand of Islam that he subscribes to believes that his goal is to make Islam predominant everywhere. So he's the main prosecutor at the International Criminal Court. So who do you think? Do you think he's going to go against Israel? So here's what Senator Cotton said: woe to him and anyone who tries to enforce these outlaw warrants. Let me give them all a friendly reminder. The American law in the ICC is known as the Hague Invasion Act for a reason. Think about it. So I looked it up. So this is in Title 22 of the United States Code, Chapter 81. And one of the sections in here is International Criminal Court. So if you go, and by the way, it's a UN-related agency. This is the UN resolution back in 1960, Resolution 138. Question relating to the case of Adolf Eichmann. Who was Adolf Eichmann? He was the guy who managed the Nazis' Holocaust of Jews. So what happened? Israel found him in Argentina, I'm pretty sure it was Argentina. They went down there, they kidnapped him, they brought him back, they tried him in Israel for war crimes, and they executed him. The UN said, how dare you do that? We're talking about international law here. So now they're going after Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, and the former defense minister of Israel, and saying, well, we're coming after you for war crimes. That's okay. But the guy who led the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews died, that was, the UN said back in 1960, Israel, you're out of line for doing this. So 64 years ago, getting a war criminal was bad. Now getting someone who you've made up as a war criminal is bad. So anyway, back to the statute. So in the statute, they have these different provisions, prohibition on cooperation with the International Criminal Court, restriction on the United States participating in certain United Nations peacekeeping operations. So listen, what does this mean? So the world put in this thing called the Rome Statute. Bill Clinton signed on to it for a while, but Congress came in and said, listen, we don't want anything to do with the UN and the International Criminal Court controlling this, because we might send our soldiers someplace and then we're subjecting our soldiers to arrest. If they go on vacation in Italy or someplace like that, they could be arrested, tried, imprisoned, that type of thing. So they put in place this act, so we can't cooperate with them, prohibition on direct or indirect transfer of classified national security information and law enforcement information to the International Criminal Court. And then there's another thing, authority to free members. This is what the part that's gotten the name, the Hague Invasion Act. In other words, what it says is, look, Hague, if the International Criminal Court convicts our people, arrests our people, imprisons our people, holds them for trial, we reserve the right as the sovereign United States of America to invade you and take our people back. Now, I think that's a very good thing. As an American citizen, I'm glad that my government is standing up to these thugs that think that they can control everything, particularly when they're just flat out wrong historically, legally, and everything else. So the other part of the statute, authority to free members of the armed forces of the United States. And then it says here that you have this, let's see, I've got the section here. Authority, the president's authorized to use all means necessary and appropriate to bring about the release of any person described in subsection B of this section. So this is 7429 of Title 22 of the United States Code. And then it says here in B, persons authorized to be free. And it says the authority of subsection A of this section shall extend to the following persons: covered United States persons, covered allied persons, and then individuals detained or imprisoned that used to be with the United States or were part of a covered allied person. So what's a covered allied person? That's also identified in the Act over here, and it says the term covered allied persons means military personnel, elected or appointed officials, or persons employed or working on behalf of the government of a NATO member country, a major non-NATO ally, including Australia, Egypt, Israel, Japan, Jordan, Argentina, the Republic of Korea, New Zealand, or Taiwan. So, and the country that the person's associated with or part of wants us to help. So now the question becomes, what happens under this act? So we've already seen Britain, Europe, I think Germany has said we won't arrest Netanyahu. France will. Not sure about Italy yet. Italy's got its own internal fights. And so the question is, let's just say Bibi Netanyahu's coming to the UN to speak. He's not going to be arrested in the United States. But what if something goes wrong with this plane? And he has to do an emergency landing in the UK. And the UK, these lunatics that run the UK now, the Labour Party, like Starmer, they arrest him. under this act, he is a allied person, allied country. And so the question is, would the United States send special forces in to rescue and free Benjamin Netanyahu? Can you imagine the global diplomatic implications of doing that? But it's only comes about because of these lunatics at the International Criminal Court that don't understand international law. Natasha Hausdorff has made the case on that many, many times. So this is an editorial in today's Times of London. The world is full of tyrants. I wonder why the ICC is so obsessed with Israel. By the way, how many International Criminal Court complaints have been lodged against Assad in Syria, against the Ayatollahs in Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran, against this person, against that person, against this country, against that? The answer is zero. It's only Israel and maybe the United States. And by the way, the rules about if they arrest with the warrant against Netanyahu, you're not even supposed to have your picture taken with him. So would that raise, like, let's say Mike Huckabee is the ambassador to Israel. He goes, he has his picture taken with Benjamin Netanyahu, which would be expected of a U.S. ambassador. Is he going to be subject to arrest if he stops in Rome on the way home or goes to The Hague? The implications of this are huge. Raman Aswan, I remember I played a clip of her a few weeks ago. She's Syrian, raised Muslim. I think she had one parent was Shia, one parent was Sunni. She's a Zionist now. She lives in Israel, very passionate about Israel. And I thought she had maybe the best explanation of all about this International Criminal Court nonsense and why it's a problem and what the solution is. This is very interesting. Listen to this.
The Israelis are upset because of the 2 arrest warrants issued for Netanyahu and Gallant. And all those Zionist activists are claiming this might have been anti-Semitic. And they ask, how come nobody's ever wanted Erdogan arrested after all he's done to the Turkish people and to all those Kurds? How come nobody has beef with the Iranian regime after all they've done to their own people and to other peoples? How come nobody wanted Bashar al-Assad arrested in spite of all he's done to the Syrian people? And I am Syrian, and do believe me, what he's done to the Syrians is unprecedented in modern history. And yet, nobody wants him arrested. Well, except most Syrians, but the world doesn't care. I wonder why. I wonder why issue arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant. Well, you fail to understand the logic in the Middle East. Leaders get away with what they do to their own people, but not to other peoples in a war. So if by any chance Gaza and the West Bank would become part of Israel, the issue would be resolved.
I thought that was a pretty good analysis. So you see what you're saying? Nobody goes after Assad because he's only murdering his own people. So, solution, make the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and Gaza part of Israel, and the problem is solved, because then Netanyahu wouldn't be arrested because he's only doing something to his own people. And so the logic of the International Criminal Court, lunatics actually would be, it wouldn't be applied in that case, but that's their reasoning. They let these guys go all the time. So Israel's united, and by the way, this in Israel, this is from the Financial Times. Benjamin Netanyahu's allies call for purge as Israel's prime minister's power grows. So the people support Netanyahu are saying, listen, we got to get rid of the deep state. And they're reviving all these cases against Netanyahu. These cases are legal nonsense. They're lawfare. I know I have friends who will disagree with me on this, but I was a lawyer, still am a lawyer, and I understand the law, and I'm just telling you, this stuff is nonsense. And now what they've done, the court ruled that Netanyahu has to sit, I believe it's for it's either 3 or 8 days a month to testify in the case. So they brought the case against Netanyahu. The prosecution finished their case. In the United States, and they didn't prove it. And the court noted it, and they said, well, let's let Netanyahu testify. Well, you should have called him. I don't know the whole procedure in and outs of Israeli law, but in the United States, you call somebody to testify. Well, in the United States, you don't have to testify against yourself. So now the court's ordered Netanyahu to sit for testimony in this court. And they're saying, by the way, they're saying this case, when I was there 2 years ago at the Knesset, I asked them, I said, how long is these cases going to go against Netanyahu? You know what I was told? 5 to 6 years. Oh, wait a minute. What? Now he's going to have to sit 3 to 8 days per month to give testimony in these cases. And so now what's going to happen? The Attorney General of Israel, who hates Netanyahu, is totally opposed to Netanyahu. She's going to go into court and say, Prime Minister Netanyahu is tied up testifying in court. Therefore, he is no longer qualified or competent to serve as the Prime Minister of Israel. Do you see the parallel of what they're doing to him and the parallel of what they tried to do to Netanyahu? And I would suggest that all these people in Israel that want to do this and think it's okay, go get the New York Times yesterday or today. In fact, if you want it, I will buy copies or print off PDFs of the editorials and send them to you. And even the New York Times says this was nonsense that we tried and it didn't work. And so these editorials that you see, so the Financial Times takes everything and flips it upside down and says, oh, these people that oppose what the great International Criminal Court is doing, they're unraveling the international legal order. What's the rule of thumb? When leftists accuse you of something, it's what they're doing. Always remember that, and it works every time, and I'm going to quit. Because we live in very interesting times. I'm only scratching the surface. This stuff is complex, it's operational. So what I would look for is you're going to hear wars and rumors of wars, but maybe that leads to a false peace. People will come in and say, hey, we've got this all solved. We've got this great. We have, what's the phrase? We have peace and security and nothing to worry about. That's possible out of all of this chaos. And that would be even more significant from a Bible prophecy standpoint. So anyway, I'll be doing some interviews this week and next, and believe me, this is only scratching the surface. So pay attention, pray for Israel, pray for peace, but also be aware, be wise as serpent and harmless as doves as we navigate these end times. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Pray that you will bless us, help us to always be aware of what's going on, but also be aware of what's going on so that it motivates us to share the gospel with those around us. Pray you'll give us those opportunities and bless us as a lot of us travel this week. Keep us safe. In Jesus' name, amen.